Hey everyone, and welcome to Straight Trooper Talk. This is the podcast for law enforcement and first responders by law enforcement and first responders. Today we're very excited today. We have a guest that we've been trying to get on for a while, and we finally got him on. His name is Don LaTulipe. Don LaTulipe worked in North Carolina. He was with the Wildlife Commission up there, and he was also a park ranger up there. And he's currently serving as a bailiff in Cherokee, North Carolina. That's about as far west as you can go before you go into another state. So, but he has an interesting story about things that happened while he was uh, with the Wildlife Commission and a park ranger. And he has one story in particular that reached it was a nationwide type thing. So, and we'll get him to talk about that. But first of all, Don, I thank you for coming on. If you would just go ahead and introduce yourself and talk to us a little bit.
Hey guys, my name's Don LaTulipe. I live out here in Murphy, North Carolina, in Cherokee County. Um, I was a wildlife officer for 25 years. Um, that's what they call them now. Back in the day, we used to be called game wardens. Game wardens was there's two people that's hated the most in the county. That's the game warden and the tax collector, and a tax collector only comes around one time a year. So we
Right.
were pretty well known in the community and that kind of thing. And I know we talked the other day about some of the stuff that we got into when we do wildlife enforcement work. What we did is typically would do boating education, boat patrol. We'd enforce the boating laws. We'd enforce hunting, fishing, and trapping laws. And of course, we do hunter safety programs, and then we do public safety too, if there was any kind of backup needed for other law enforcement agencies and that sort of thing. But we do things like we put up the mechanical deer, and then we'd hide in the bushes and wait for people to come by and shoot the deer. And then other days we just get hit out in the field and wait till dark and watch for people to come by and spotlight at night and that sort of thing. And we started to get into some issues with our bear hunters. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Bear hunting is a huge thing on the East Coast, where down in the swamps where they run bears with dogs, and then it's also real big
Right.
up here in the western North Carolina counties, where we've got a big bear population. I mean, we need bear hunters to kind of, you know, thin the population a little bit so they don't become such a nuisance, breaking into people's houses and turning over trash cans. And you know, people are scared of bears when they get around their houses and that sort of thing. So they kind of help us out. But there's also some other things that go on in the bear hunting community. Like back in the late 90s, they did a Operation Smoky Bear. It
Mm-hmm.
was out this way, and some of our bear hunting crowds were selling bear gallbladders and some of the different parts of the bear.
What? Okay. So, well, just the first couple of questions before we go any further. So, do you guys work as a in a region, or are you assigned to a region or a statewide, or how does that work?
Yeah, there's nine districts in the state.
Uh
Our
huh.
district is District 9. It's the furthest one west. Our district takes in from about Asheville west. And then there's two
Gotcha.
patrol areas, I'm sorry, two platoons in that district. And then within those
Okay.
platoons are two or three patrol areas. Um,
Okay.
I was in
Okay.
I
Am
was
I?
in the furthest patrol area west.
Okay, I got you. So, and how many of you guys would typically be like, I know with like the mechanical deer and certain things, you might bring a lot of people in, but just on I don't know, a daily basis, how many people would cover your
Well,
district,
there's actually 100 counties in the state, and
right?
200 officers, 200 wildlife officers in the state of North Carolina. And that includes all our
Wow.
upper management, the major, the majors, the colonel, the captains, the Raleigh staff. So what that averages out to is about 1.5 to 2 officers per county. So
Right. Okay.
my patrol area when I retired was a 3 county area, was Macon, Clay, and Cherokee County. And to give you an
Okay.
idea of how big an area that was, the state of Rhode Island is the same square miles as my 3 counties that I was working. We had 5 officers to
Right.
cover an
Okay.
area the size of
Okay.
the state of Rhode Island.
Okay. Well, that okay. So I got the jurisdictional thing down because that's something that's important, and it's different with everybody. I know with the Highway Patrol in South Carolina, it was set up by districts, kind of the same way. So I just wanted to make sure um, that it was the same way. And I guess my next question, before we get too much or get further into what you're talking about, is what the selling of black bear. You said they were taking organs out of these black bears that they were. Uh, I I would consider it poaching. Maybe that's the wrong word, but they were like, illegally killing them, poaching them, or whatever. But why would they need this organ?
Well, the Asian market has a big demand for it for aphrodisiac. They use it for medicines, medicinal value, but an aphrodisiac, the liquid out of a gallbladder is what they use to make these medicines with, and it's extremely expensive.
And it and it only comes out of a black
Mm-hmm.
bear.
Yep.
Wow.
They use other
I
things
mean,
too, like reindeer antler. They grind it up and make stuff like that, and other things they use for the same type purposes. But the black bear gallbladder was one of the ones that they used for that. And they'd sell the paws and the claws and the teeth and skulls and different things for people make jewelry and decorations and stuff like that out of them. But typically, you're
right.
only allowed to take one bear per hunter for a hunting license per year. And these guys were using other people's tags. They were shooting more than if they could get their animal home without having us check them, or if they didn't have to call it in, if they could get it home. And the way they check animals in here in North Carolina is before you move the animal from the site of kill, you're supposed to notch the tag. You have a paper tag that you carry around in your wallet. You notch that tag, that allows you to move that animal from the site of the kill to where you're going to process it. Then you have 24 hours
Right.
or until you start to processing the animal to call the Wildlife Commission and report your kill. So one of the deals when they started getting into this big case, not only were they killing them outside the state of North Carolina, they were killing them in Tennessee, they were killing them in Georgia, they were killing them on federal property, they were killing them in national parks. The Smoky Mountains National Park, there were several bears being taken there. And when you do that, then you start bringing in other agencies. So this thing got really
Right.
big really fast. We had about 80 people charged with several hundred violations. And one of the one of the issues that they had was their attorneys were arguing that we dogpiled a bunch of charges on these folks. Um,
Uh huh.
but when you write a speeding ticket, if you see somebody speeding, you stop them, you write them a speeding ticket, they get one ticket. It's one violation. When you take an animal unlawfully, when I just talked about having to tag it at the site of kill, then you have to call it in when you get home. You have to
Mm-hmm.
transport it from the site of the kill to your house or wherever. Whenever you don't tag it, that's a violation. When you don't report it, that's a violation. When you transport it unlawfully because you haven't tagged it and you don't plan on tagging it, when you cross
Mm-hmm.
state lines, that steps into the federal regulations, the Federal Lacey Act violation. So it gets another agency
Right.
involved. Then you've got 2 states, or if you kill it on the national park, that's a Federal Lacey Act violation when they move it off the park. or they kill it on the park, it's a federal violation. So you start stacking. They said we were stacking these charges, but what happens is when you one act of killing a bear and not tagging it properly, it carries about 5 or 6 charges with
Right. No,
just one act.
I totally understand. I mean, um, in our line of work, the same thing would happen. Let's say you may have a driving under the influence, but if he commits another crime within that time, then you got 2 charges. So I definitely understand that. But when you're getting into what you're talking about, you're talking about 5 and 6 charges just for poaching this bear and doing what they were
Yeah,
doing.
for one act. And then
One act.
there were some. What happened was this Operation Something Brewing. This thing happened. It started in around 2012, and we we had some of our guys that volunteered to step out of um, their field role as a wildlife officer someplace in a different part of the state. They gave up,
Hmm.
spending time with their families and coming and going on a daily basis. They went undercover. So they came to these
Right.
counties that nobody knew them, and they started taking on odd jobs like building decks or putting a roof on people's houses in these western counties as just handymen.
Right.
And that's kind of how they got
Yes,
their
sir.
foot in the door with these bear hunting crowds is they would build decks with them. And while they're working, they'd start talking about hunting and fishing. And then
Oh,
see,
okay.
because these areas in especially in the mountain areas, they're very clannish. They don't just allow anybody to go hunt with them. You've got to
Right.
be
I understand.
invited, and unless they really know who you are and your background, they're not going to invite you and kill a bear illegally in front of them. So they're
Right.
not going to burn
Oh,
themselves by doing that. So these guys, it
right.
took them a year or two to get in the confidence and the trust with these folks to actually go along with them to kill some of these bears.
Right. So so you had some guys that were deep
Yeah,
undercover, and like you said, spent years and years um, undercover, and they finally get the trust of these guys that were doing this. How many people do you think? Let's say you said, I believe Georgia, I believe I read Tennessee, uh, and North Carolina. Is that
yep.
right?
The U.S. Forest Service and the National Park Service. There was about 5
Okay.
agencies involved.
Okay. And how many people, poachers, criminal wise, was
There
involved?
were just the folks that were charged were a little over 80 people, and there
Okay.
was several hundred charges that came out of that. Um, when when we started to go and serve our search warrants to collect evidence to charge these guys with, because sometimes when you go to their house and go to write them tickets, you bump into stuff that's maybe there's a bear in a freezer or something's laying on the front porch, that's been laying there for a few days or whatever. They just don't have a tag for it. Well, unless you have a right to be there on their front porch to
Yeah.
begin with, you can't really use that as evidence. So we had to
Right.
go get
Gotcha.
search warrants for all this huge long list of people in about 15 counties, North
Hmm.
Carolina, Georgia, and Tennessee, um, to do these search warrants. But the problem with that was some of these small towns in these rural communities, the people that are related to these bear hunters work in the courthouse. Whether
Oh, yeah, yeah. It seems like I read
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
whether they're the clerk of court or they're just one of the clerks in the courthouse or one of the magistrates. So some of the magistrates that we went to pull these search warrants, have them sign off on and go execute these search warrants, knew these people. And
Hmm.
somehow, I don't know. I can't tell you how these folks found out about it, but us going up there to their houses, they're already prepared
Right.
for us to show up. So there was a
Right.
couple of places that back then we didn't even have AR rifles. We carried shotguns as our long gun and pistols as our sidearm. And
Yes,
some of
sir.
the things that happened, we just felt like it was a very dangerous situation to go into. So we got a couple of other agencies. We all got together, the Forest Service and the Wildlife Commission, and some um, even the sheriff's departments helped in certain ways to help transport people and collect evidence and that sort of thing. And it turned into something that, in the public eye, there, if you step back and look at it from outside where we were at, to the general person that didn't know what was going on or have any idea what was happening, it just looks like there was all these cops showed up for somebody that killed a bear. Well, what it was
Right.
a 4 or 5 year process.
Operation.
It was an operation that came to a head, and it got to the point where we thought it was going to be a dangerous situation. So for the safety of everybody, we went in with a few more people than we normally would have. And that became an issue. Then they said that we were strong arming, we were stacking charges, we did a lot of these other things. Well, after all this stuff hit the court system, the DAs, they'd never dealt with anything. Most times when I was prosecuting a case, if I had written a ticket to a night deer hunter or somebody that I had several elements to prove. You had to prove that it was
Mm-hmm.
30 minutes after sunset. I had to prove that they used an artificial light and they swept the field that's known to be inhabited by deer. Then I also had to have a loaded firearm in the vehicle. They didn't have to shoot at the animal, but those were the elements that I had to meet. A lot of times when I'd go into court, these DAs they didn't deal with wildlife violations very often. So I would have to have a report written to pretty much prosecute
Mm-hmm.
the case myself. They would just go off.
Right.
I'd highlight what the law was. I'd have a copy of the law. I'd highlight what the fine was and all these other things so the DA could present it to the judge. When all this
Right.
came down, one of these attorneys that these guys hired, he's an expensive attorney from down east. He he asked for discovery of evidence of all the evidence that we gathered when we did these search warrants. Well, come to find out, in district court, you don't have to turn over evidence. But this DA,
Mm-hmm.
he ordered us to take all our evidence and give it all back. Well, when you go into court and you don't have any evidence, it's kind of hard to prove a case.
Oh my gracious.
And this was a district court level case, and they're asking for discovery. Now you can ask for it all day long, but if we had a DA that knew what was going on and had prosecuted these cases before,
Mm-hmm.
it may have been a totally different, because some of these guys got off with I was reading in some of that literature that I sent you the other day that it was a
Right.
$25 fine and a $10 surcharge, and they lose their hunting license for 2 years. I mean, that's not even a slap on the wrist. For,
No, and I read where one of the somebody that got, like you said, it was a $25 charge, and then they got probation, and the probation got suspended, and I couldn't believe it. But I'm gonna stop right there and let everybody know that we're gonna take a break, and we'll come back with Don LaTulipe. Don LaTulipe is going to be with us right after the break. So come on back, and we'll continue our conversation. See you in a minute. Unfortunately, the accident that you just saw was something that happens in America every single day. If you find yourself in an incident like this, you need someone to come to your aid and someone to help. The battle has just begun. Call 1-855-TRUE-TALK. We'll put you in contact with not just an attorney, but the attorney that you will need. The battle's just begun. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Straight Trooper Talk. We are having just a interesting conversation with a young man that has enlightened me on some of the things that goes on in the wildlife community. Um, uh, this is Don LaTulipe. We're back with Don LaTulipe. Don, if you guys missed the first part, you need to watch it. But Don he worked with the North Carolina Wildlife Commission. He was also a ranger, park ranger, I believe, and now he is a bailiff for Cherokee, up in Cherokee, North Carolina, which is a county up in North Carolina. So where we left off was we were talking about Operation Something Brewing. So if anybody wants to look that up, just type in Operation Something Brewing, Bruin. I believe that's right. Is that correct,
Yes,
Don?
sir. Yep.
Okay. All right. So if you want to look up, especially on YouTube, there's about 9, 10 videos. Don, where you left off, when you left off, you was talking about some of the things that was going on with the district attorneys and the charges and stuff like this. How much did this seems like a pretty big operation. Once you get into the federal aspect of it, you get into some taxpayer money. Do you know roundabout approximately how much North Carolina taxpayers had to pay? How much this
Yeah.
cost?
When I was watching one of those videos the other night in preparation for this interview, and our previous colonel, Dale Cavney, he was talking about how much just our undercover operation, without um, getting involved with the national parks or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, they had all their own bills. What the state of North Carolina had invested in this undercover operation up until the point where we started serving our search warrants was $2 million.
Whoa, to me. And this is and what year was this?
We started serving those warrants around the end of 2014 into 2015.
That is definitely a large
Yep.
operation. Um, and I believe you said about 80 people were
Yep.
charged.
Few more than 80 people. There were several hundred charges. Um,
Right.
and not all of it was in regards to selling gallbladders. Sometimes it was just
Right.
people um, that wanted to go bear hunting. They would hire some of these folks to to guide them on a guided bear hunting trip. Um, they've usually got a pack of dogs that they've got places, and that's one of these violations. Another one of these violation issues that we would get into. You're allowed to place bait on private land as long as it's natural bait. That would be peanuts or apples or pears or something that's naturally occurring. If I wanted to collect apples off my tree and carry it out to my hunting spot, I could put it as long as it's private. When you get onto state land
Right.
or federal national forest, you're not supposed to put any bait out because technically it creates an issue where you're drawing deer or bear from another area where other people that don't have time or the money to put that kind of bait out. It's not fair for everybody. So nobody's really allowed
Correct.
to place bait on public land. So whenever these
Right.
guys would either put bait on public land or they would use something that was processed. Now, one of the favorite things that they would like to put out was chocolate. Right over here in Cleveland, Tennessee, is the um, Mars plant, the
Chocolate factory.
chocolate factory. They make M&Ms, they make Mars bars, they make the peanut butter cups, and anything that hit the ground or broke or they couldn't put in a package, they just kind of sweep it into the corner. And after making hundreds of pounds of it every day, there'd be big piles of it. So they just push it out into
Right.
a bin, a storage area, and these bear hunters would show up with 55-gallon barrels. They'd scoop up in a front end loader and load these barrels for $25 or $30 a barrel, they'd haul this chocolate off into the woods, and you know, chocolate to a bear is no different than putting out Halloween candy for kids at Halloween. If they
Right,
know
right,
there's a bucket of candy there, them kids are going to come back every day till it's gone. Same thing with a bear. They'll come down there and they'll eat till they're foundered. And they'll go crawl up in a tree and they'll sleep in the tree. And then when they get up the next morning, they're going to come right down and go right back to the same tree or to the same bait site.
right,
So they had
right,
those violations going on. They had anytime that they would take a guided hunt, if they would take these folks, a lot of these guys were taking people into the national park to kill bears. And like I said before, anytime you kill an animal on national property and then transport it to private, as soon as you transport it off it, you cross a federal boundary. That's a Lacey Act violation.
right,
So that draws the feds into it
right,
too. So that's why there were so many. When you watch those videos on YouTube, you'll see their attorney, Rusty McLean. He was really adamant about trying to force the issue of um, how many charges were stacked. He keeps saying they were stacked. Well, whenever, like I said, whenever you kill a bear, you got 5 charges because you haven't tagged it,
right,
you haven't uh, reported it, you transported it unlawfully. You know, and all these different charges come from one incident. So
right.
out of 80 people, if they killed 3 or 4 bear, uh, that's 5 per bear for 80 people. That's a
Yeah.
lot of charges.
20
Yeah.
plus.
So that's the issue, and that's where the newspapers and the news media, people that don't hunt, they didn't understand why these people were charged with so many charges, and it's just the nature of the beast. When you kill an animal and you don't follow all the procedures for checking that animal in and tagging it and doing whatever you need to take it legally. I mean, you have to have a license for it. You have to have somebody there because once you shoot one, you're done for the year. So then you got to go out and get somebody else. And a lot of times, those people that they get to use their license, they don't shoot the bear because a lot of times
Right,
their dogs have treed this bear way back in the woods. And most people today are not going to be willing to run through the woods and get to where this bear is up in a tree before it jumps out or something. They say that probably about 60 to 70% of the bears are killed by about 10% of the people. They just use other people's
wow,
tags. They'll shoot the bears out, and then they'll go down there and they say, okay, you killed a bear up there is about this size, and this is kind of what the color is. He killed it on this ridge, and you'll know the story in case anybody asks you. So they're using other people's tags. They're killing them out of season. Some of them were actually trapping bears and moving them. Part of that deal that the one of the teams that I was on, when we served a search warrant, we were actually at a fox pen,
mm,
where they said these guys would come up, they bring their dogs to this guy's house, they would sign up and sign a reserve a time slot, and then what day of the week that they wanted to hunt. They would come up there with their dogs and turn them loose inside this fenced area that was about 40 or 50 acres. Well,
mm-hmm.
come to find out, one of the local agencies was getting nuisance bear calls, so they'd send a horse trailer over there and trap this bear out of a campground or someplace like that, and they'd haul them up there to this fox pen and turn the bears loose in this fox pen. So these guys were fox hunting, but if their dogs happened to get in on a bear, and one of my jobs was to walk through there and find out if there was any bears still left in there. Just walking through there, I saw 3 or 4 bears. Now, how many times have
Right.
you ever walked through the woods and bumped into a bear? I saw I
Nah,
saw
I don't
three or
believe I
four.
want to
I
either.
know I saw at least 3 because they were different colors and different sizes. One of them may have been the
Right.
same, but we also found a big bear chocolate bait site up there too, where they had a bunch of M&Ms and M's and stuff, and about a I don't know 200 gallon septic drum that they were using to feed the bears. And all this stuff was supposed to go to court, and I don't ever know what ever came out of it. But you saw some of the charges on some of these folks. They were trapping bears,
I did.
they were hunting bears, and you'll also see on those videos they were saying that our undercover guys shot a couple of these bears. Well,
I seen that.
yeah,
Yeah, I was going to ask you about
yeah.
that.
What the problem with that is, anytime you've got somebody undercover, just like when folks go in to do these drug buys and things like that, they get put in a compromising situation. And apparently,
Yeah,
a
you're right.
couple of our undercover guys, they had shot at these bears up in a tree. If it's way up about 100 feet in the air, and they're shooting, they can kind of pull left and miss the bear on purpose. So
Right.
the guides still think that he's actually trying to kill these bears and not blow his cover. But this one
Right.
particular one that you'll actually see some footage of it where this bear was run by a pack of dogs up under a rock bluff, and there was a big pile of rocks, and this bear was up in there, and the dogs had him bayed in that hole. Well, all they could see was a black bear through that hole in the top of the rocks, and the guide is telling him, shoot this bear, shoot this bear. Well, he doesn't know how big the bear is. He doesn't know anything about the bear. He just shows up after they get this bear bayed, and when he gets up on the rock pile, apparently some of the guides that were guiding him had seen this bear run in there and didn't realize it was a cub. So, in order
Oh,
to shoot a bear legally here in North Carolina, back then it was 55 or 60 pounds. Now it's 100. But back then, this bear was even smaller than what was legal to kill. So when he shot this
right.
bear, I mean, he's standing right over the top of this bear looking at it, 10 feet away. If he pulls left or right to shoot at it and to not hit it, I mean, he couldn't do it. Then they would know
Right.
that something's going on. Why is he shooting and missing all these bears? So he ends up killing this
Definitely.
bear, and when they drag it out, he's killed a bear cub. So
Right.
that in itself was a violation that one of our undercover guys committed, but it was a circumstances that couldn't be avoided. Not
Avoided. Yeah, I mean,
not without
yeah,
blowing
I
a
was
two
reading
million
it.
dollar operation and 3 or 4 years of work trying to catch these folks. You know, it, and the way the Wildlife Commission at that time looked at it was, if that one bear was sacrificed or something like that happened, to save a whole bunch
Uh,
more, because we only catch like 1% of violations. Out of all the violations that are happening, we only catch about 1 or 2% of everything that's happening out there. Because normally to catch somebody in a wildlife violation, you have to be there when it happens. And how often do you ever look over
right.
your shoulder and you see a game warden standing there? So
Right.
it's very difficult to catch people in the act, but some of the things that happened, I mean, it just happened because that's how it worked out.
Right. And anytime that anybody that's watching this will understand, anytime somebody's been undercover, I don't care if it's a small operation to a large operation. I promise you, you're going to be met with a defining, or you're going to be met with an issue of, what do I
Yep.
do? I mean, if I do this, I'm going to break the law. But if I don't do it, then 3 or 4 years of me getting everybody's trust and finally infiltrating this organization is going to be out the
Yep.
window for
Yep.
nothing. So I do want to stop right there, and I just want to take one more break before we go any further. And we ask that you do come back with Mr. Don LaTulipe with the North Carolina Wildlife Commission, and we'll continue our talk in reference to Operation Something Brewing. Come back.
As a retired police officer, one working with the Sheriff's Office and working with the State Highway Patrol, we need stories from people like you. Both funny stories and serious stories. If you go on this website, straighttroopertalk.com, hey, there's a spot on there. Leave your information. We'll contact you. We'll get your story. We'll get your story on air. And hey, we'll share it with the world. Come see us at straighttroopertalk.com.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Straight Trooper Talk. I am with my guest, Mr. Don LaTulipe. Don LaTulipe was with the North Carolina Wildlife Commission. He is retired, I believe, right? You are retired right now?
I retired about 3 years ago.
Yep. Okay. He's retired, and he's currently serving as a bailiff in Cherokee, North Carolina. So, Don, thank you for coming on our show, and we are back with you. And I think we left off, talking about Operation Something Brewing, and that's spelled B-R-U-I-N. B-R-U-I-N for those of you who want to get online, and there is a plethora of information that you can just read and get into. And this I really didn't realize how big of an operation this thing was when you get the federal government involved and everything like that. I also didn't realize how big the wildlife community is in North Carolina. I'm not too far from where you're at. I just didn't realize it was that big of a deal, but it's the fishing and the hunting stuff like that it's like y'all's number one touring spot or whatever.
Yep.
So
yeah, we've got people come in from all over the country to hunt bear and deer and hogs. The National Smoky Mountains National Park is right about an hour and a half from here. That's one of the largest black bear populations in the world. So we've got a lot of bear in this area. The other thing I wanted to mention to you, though, was towards the end, when all this stuff hit the newspapers and social media and got in the court system, things got so political. There was calls being made to they've got what they call a Bear Hunters Association. They've got a group that actually lobbies in state legislature for law changes and if they feel like they're being wronged or some issue with the Wildlife Commission or how we're regulating their bear hunting activities, they've got a huge voice down there. And somebody made the right phone calls. They went through a couple of the senators, and they ended up getting in. What was the fella's name? Mark Meadows. Mark Meadows was our state senator at the time. And when Mark got word of how big this thing had gotten, he asked the feds to do an investigation into how we conducted ourselves in investigating and charging all these cases. I think it said that he found that it was a state case, and it was going to stay at the state level for investigation. And our legislature actually set up a committee, which is the first time I'd ever heard of in law enforcement history, is whenever we would get a complaint from the public on how a wildlife officer treated or charged or talked to, or if any type of complaint, it would have to be investigated by their superior officers. It would have to report be made, and then those reports would be submitted to Raleigh. Raleigh would put together a packet and send them all onto this review board. And this committee would look over every single one of our complaints from that point on. I don't know if that committee's still going, but all that came from Operation Something Brewing.
Right. And I believe everybody knows who Mark Meadows is now, but he was a congressman in North Carolina at this time, right? This is all right. There's a lot of stuff for people to go online,
research it
and check it. Yes, sir.
Now you'll see a lot of negative stuff too, because social media, anybody can put something on YouTube, and a lot of these folks, a speeding ticket or even any other kind of ticket, it doesn't seem like it really affects people and their personal lives as much as a wildlife violation does. And that's something that I saw throughout my career. We caught some folks over in Cades Cove in the Smoky Mountains National Park shooting a deer illegally. And somebody saw it on the tailgate of their truck as they were driving by at a hotel. And they were taking pictures of this deer, and they recognized it from being one of the deer up in the cove. It was one of these deer that everybody took pictures of. And when they said they were calling the police, they tried to get rid of the deer. When the cops showed up, this deer was in the shower. They dragged it in the hotel room. They stuck it in the shower and pulled the curtain and were hoping that they wouldn't get caught with this deer. They were a bunch of guys had come up from Florida, and when they seen a deer that big, they'd never seen a deer with antlers that size, and they just panicked and killed it. Well, they were going to take it home and say that they shot it at home. Well, when all that happened, they got caught. When they got back to the house, their wives divorced them. 2 of the 3 got divorced.
Good, great.
People, for some reason, I don't understand what the wildlife violations are, but these people in these small communities, when they get embarrassed like that, they go all over social media and they get upset about it, and they want to, take all these added measures instead of just saying I was wrong. I did, went through court. We got it taken care of and be done with it. These folks make videos. They did all kinds of posts on social media. They call the newspapers and all these other things. And if you look back at the court cases, 90% of them we won. And that was without without the evidence that we had gathered that we had to give back. So I mean, it was a successful operation, but it just seemed like it was a black eye.
Yeah, like I said, I've read through a lot of stuff and a lot of this information. And anytime you have an undercover operation of any magnitude, of any size, there's going to be good things that come out of it and bad things that come out of it. I definitely believe that Operation Something Brewing, good things came out of it. And I definitely think that if anything, that it opened the eyes of the people in North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, down here in the South, where the wildlife is sometimes people's only way of making a living.
Yep.
And, as a trooper, when, people would come up to me and they would say, Chris, I just don't understand how you do it. How do you walk up to a car in the middle of the night and on the side of the interstate,
not knowing who's in there,
and not knowing who it is, and be scared? And I'm just, and I stop them right there and I say, listen, the day you stop being scared, or you stop, I'm not scared, it's not the word, but concerned, then you need to stop what you're doing. But I have a lot of friends down here that are in the same line of work in South Carolina that you are in. And I know my surroundings. It's the interstate. Yeah. I'm going to do a passenger side approach, whatever the case may be. I'm going to take every measure I can. But doing what you do, I mean, you've got to hide under a log in the middle of the woods for 2 nights.
And if you called for backup, who would know where to come get you?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, you got to have this GPS monitoring device so somebody can just find you.
Yep.
And send smoke signals or something. I mean, and there's been people in the woods before, and like I say, I have friends that do this, and they're just like, when you got to be real careful, because if you stop in a car, you don't know if the occupants have got a gun. Well, guess what happens when most people are hunting? They got guns. Yeah. So you know that the people you're going to be interacting with have guns, which makes your job so much more dangerous. I don't know. It's just one of the most dangerous things in law enforcement.
The only thing I thought about that though is 99% of the people that we dealt with as hunters and fishermen, sportsmen, that gun was there for a tool for them to do the sport that they're interacting in. They
Right.
very rarely did I ever have any of them use it as malice towards me. You know, every
Right.
now and again somebody might lose their head and point a gun at one another, but when it comes down to it, they weren't out to hurt anybody. They were just caught, you know, violating the wildlife law. And that's the way we would
Right.
approach it. We just say, you know, it happens. It was an opportunity. You might have taken an unlawful bear or deer or something, and we're just going to write tickets and let you go to the house. We don't have to point guns at each other, or you just talk yourself down from it, and everybody walks
Right.
away,
Right.
safe.
And most people are
Yeah.
good. Most people, but I was trying to think back last night. Out of my career, I mean, yes, I have some stories that get really hairy,
Yep.
but out of almost 25 years, they're the good outweighed the bad
By a whole lot.
and
Yeah. Yep.
right. And have you always been an outdoor person,
Yeah.
outdoorsy person?
Yeah. I've hunted and fished ever since I could hold a fishing pole. Yeah.
Right. So I guess that means you're currently fishing, right?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Okay. So I heard that you had I heard that you you had a fishing guide. You were guiding fishermen up there in that area. Let's talk about that a little bit before we close
Yep.
out.
I've just on my free days, if I'm off and it's a pretty day to fish, or if I set it up ahead of time, I like to take people striper fishing. I like to get out there first
Mm-hmm.
thing in the morning and put a few lines out with some planer boards. And, we catch 8, 10, 12, 15-pound stripers, pretty regularly. We catch them over 20 and 30 pounds now and again. We do some trout fishing.
Oh,
Yeah, we do some really fun fishing up here. That's out of a boat. And then when we go trout fishing, there's some streams that I take people fishing out here. And then we can also fish for some trout in one of the lakes down here, too.
and so if anybody wanted to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
You can look me up on Facebook. There's not many LaTulipes out there, but Don LaTulipe. And then my little guide service, I don't have anything really advertised. I just use it by word of mouth, but it's High Roller Guide Service.
High Roller Guide
Yeah,
Service.
we've got a casino up here. One of the Indian casinos is here in Murphy. So a lot of times people will come into town, they'll stay at the casino, do a little gambling, and then they can take a trip with me on the High Roller and try to catch some stripers and just have a good morning.
So all together throughout your career, how many years do you have in law enforcement?
I retired from the Wildlife Commission with 25 years. I took the early retirement for that. They passed a 25-year bill. Yep. I gotten to the point where it had just gotten so political, and the court system just didn't have time for a lot of these cases that you work so hard on and put your heart and soul into, that I just figured that I could do other things to maybe make a dollar.
Definitely understand. I definitely
So
understand.
that's when
so you had 25 years with them.
And then I got into the bailiff type stuff, and I've been doing that about 3 years. So I got about 28 years total.
So almost 30 years.
Yep.
Almost 30 years into law enforcement. Well, listen, Don, this has definitely been such an interesting and eye-opening experience for me. I hope it was for everybody out there listening. I just want to give him a shout out, give his fishing guide a shout out. High Roller Guide Service, and that's up in Murphy, North Carolina.
Yes, sir.
Right up there in Cherokee. That's near the Indian Reservation. So if you want to go fishing, this is the guy you need to go fishing with. So, but I want to thank you, Don, so much for sharing your stories on Straight Trooper Talk, and hopefully one day we might have you back and talk about some other things that's been going on, because I know after 25 years, you've got some more stories that are probably worth telling. So, but I want to go ahead and thank you so much for coming on board and spending your afternoon.
Yes, sir. No problem. I appreciate you guys inviting me on.
Yes,
All
sir.
right.
Well, Don, you be careful.
All right.
Okay.
Y'all too. Have a good day.
All right.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. If you want to see more of Straight Trooper Talk, get on our website. Each and every week, we'll be having somebody within the law enforcement and the first responder community. Straight Trooper Talk is going to have each and every type of law enforcement officer that you can think about. Somebody within the first responder community, EMS, military, active, some retired. So, but join us each week here on Straight Trooper Talk, www.straighttroopertalk, and stay tuned and stay safe. Thanks.